What a year! 2017 has been incredible for films, with a plethora of high-quality releases across a wide range of genres, styles, and budgets. We've seen acclaimed masters continue to push their style, fresh-faced talents make bold, audacious debuts, low-budget indies which touched a wide audience, large-budgeted spectacle which told intimate stories, challenging work which divided audiences, and some wonderfully executed crowd-pleasers. It's a year which scratched nearly every cinematic itch, and I had no shortage of great movies to compile a top 10 list. In fact, I actually had to make some really tough cuts, but the 10 which remain all exemplify top-notch cinema. Let's get started with number 10, The Killing of a Sacred Deer. Yorgos Lanthimos' whole career is basically a rebuttal to the notion that every story has already been told. The Killing of a Sacred Deer is another bold, provocative work, following a successful heart surgeon forced to make a hard choice by a teenage boy seeking revenge. You can probably imagine a standard film about a surgeon forced to confront his failure to save a patient, but The Killing of a Sacred Deer ain't that film. This is a dark examination of the family unit and modern masculinity, held up by magical realism, strangely blunt dialogue, and an ominous, clinical tone. For as heavy and violent as the film is though, The Killing of a Sacred Deer is also darkly comic, and provided me some of the biggest laughs I had from any film in 2017. Strange as these characters are, all of the actors do fine work, with the standout being Barry Keoghan, whose Martin is both dorkishly charming and deeply sinister. I'm not sure I totally get everything Lanthimos is doing here, but it's a hell of a ride all the same. Number 9. Mother. Speaking of dark and challenging, Darren Aronofsky's Mother is one of 2017's most divisive releases, being hailed as a masterpiece and dismissed as meaningless nonsense in equal measure. As you can probably guess, I lean a lot closer to the former. While the film's biblical allegories can be a little on the nose, especially once you start to make the connections, that's certainly not the only way to read Mother. I was more struck by the feminist angle, as we watch a younger woman's ideas and concerns consistently be overlooked by her supposedly benevolent husband. I'd argue that the real core of the film is exploring how women, and young women in particular, are often casually dismissed by a sexist society, with the intensely violent third act speaking to how such sexism reflects a deep-rooted misogyny. That's not really a perfect reading, but the film does open itself to such speculation. Even if it didn't, Mother still functions as damn fine cinema, thanks to the nail-biting tension, great performances, and exhilarating third act. Number 8. 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. Martin McDonagh had already made a name for himself as the maker of highly irreverent comedies with a dark streak like The Wonderful in Bruges, but with 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, McDonagh has broken through to a higher level. The film boasts the same stylized, profanity-laced dialogue that defines most of McDonagh's work, and indeed much of the film is hilarious. But what elevates 3 Billboards is the finely crafted story. This is a plot that continuously surprises, even in the final few minutes. On a deeper level, the film touches on some very relevant issues pertaining to grief, holding law enforcement accountable, and the dangers of vigilante justice. The film ultimately raises more questions than answers, but that feels appropriate for this subject matter. These are hard topics which don't have easy answers, and McDonagh's expressed frustrations and confusion feel entirely appropriate. 3 Billboards also features one of the best casts of the year, and it's all anchored by Frances McDormand, who creates in Mildred Hayes a badass and awesome presence, but never loses sight of the grieving mother at the character's core. Number 7. The Square. Ruben Östlund's epic Palme d'Or winning satire hasn't really broken out in North America the way it should have, and that's a real shame. Following a museum curator as he undergoes a personal crisis in the midst of debuting a new exhibit, The Square is an excellent critique of a liberal elite who pose themselves as enlightened and progressive, while ultimately adhering to strict separations between them and the lower classes. The film is not necessarily a full-on indictment, but it's certainly interested in exposing hypocrisies and contradictions. If that sounds too heavy, The Square also excels as an often hilarious comedy about the pretensions of the modern art world, punctuated by some excellent comic set pieces. Finally, the film also works quite simply as a story, where we watch someone try to keep their shit together as their life continues to fall apart around them. Number 6. Logan. Logan is everything I've been asking for from superhero movies. That this is R-rated, dark, and somber certainly sets it apart from comic book movies in 2017, and they're certainly the right choices for this kind of movie, but what truly elevates Logan is the seriousness with which the filmmakers take the project. The film takes a hard look at a violent person in the final stretch of his life, and along the way also explores aging and the plight of marginalized groups very powerfully. Hugh Jackman has been the perfect Wolverine for 17 years, and with Logan, he finds new depths in the character, while Patrick Stewart's take on an elderly Xavier is often heartbreaking. Director James Mangold fully embraces the drama and character, but for as different a superhero movie as Logan is, the film still excels as a story of heroism and doing the right thing. The whole thing builds to a pitch-perfect ending, both for Logan himself and for the X-Men series as a whole. Number 5. Dunkirk. It takes a special kind of talent to take a genre that has become so familiar to audiences and bring a fresh perspective. But with Dunkirk, Christopher Nolan has accomplished just this. Where most World War II films post-Saving Private Ryan have focused largely on the graphic violence and horrors of warfare, Nolan instead taps into the disorientation of battle in his telling of the Dunkirk evacuation. The film's cross-cutting of timelines is crucial to the sense of confusion, while Hans Zimmer's score consistently raises the tension as the threat of death looms largely over the characters. Nolan forgoes many of the conventional methods of character development in a war movie, and instead focuses on simply watching the various parties navigate their situation the best they can. The result is a fascinating look at how people contend with crisis, and despite of, or perhaps because of, the lack of sentimentality, the end of Dunkirk is quietly inspiring and very powerful. Number 4. The Shape of Water. I never would have expected a love story between a mute woman and a fish man to be an Oscar darling, but The Shape of Water has accomplished just that, and deservedly so. Guillermo del Toro's fairy tale romance is wonderfully creative and endlessly inspiring. The central relationship may not totally work on a literal level, but if you're willing to buy into the film's fairy tale vibe, then you'll be rewarded by a moving love story between two outsiders. Eliza, in particular, is an amazing character, with Sally Hawkins' performance ranking among the year's absolute best. The film is also a call for meeting the other with love and kindness rather than hatred and cruelty. That's especially evident in the romance, but the supporting characters are also made up of marginalized people who come together to overcome. Even if The Shape of Water doesn't touch you emotionally, it's hard not to be enamored by Del Toro's craft, and his sheer boldness in bringing such a unique vision to the screen. Number 3, The Florida Project. Movies about people living in poverty tend to be heavy, depressing affairs, but when it comes to The Florida Project, that couldn't be further from the truth. Told from the perspective of 6-year-old Mooney, The Florida Project exudes a sense of pure joy as we watch Mooney play with her friends, hang out with her mom, get ice cream, and go on little adventures. Sean Baker often places his camera at a child's level, reaffirming Mooney's perspective, while the energetic and colorful cinematography help bring a child's perspective to life in a wonderful way. That said, the film is not blind to the hardships faced by the adult characters, with Willem Dafoe's Bobby being an especially fascinating figure. In its own subtle way, The Florida Project makes some very salient points about income inequality, but that's not really the focus. What stands out most is Baker's vivid portrait of an interesting setting and the people who populate it. Number 2. Blade Runner 2049. Like a lot of film geeks, the original Blade Runner is something of a sacred text to me. And while I was looking forward to Denis Villeneuve's sequel, I had serious doubts that the film would really be able to compare with Ridley Scott's masterpiece. And yet, by some miracle, Blade Runner 2049 ended up a near-perfect sequel to the science fiction classic. Villeneuve, in combination with cinematographer Roger Deakins and a tremendous art department, are able to evoke the visual style of the original film, while simultaneously depicting how the city has changed in the time between movies and creating something new. Villeneuve also matches the reserved pacing of the original, and weaves a story which naturally builds on its predecessor, while also expanding on the core themes of humanity and societal oppression. The film is also populated with a great new set of characters, brought to life by an amazing cast, while a returning Harrison Ford delivers his best performance in decades. Finally, as with the original, Blade Runner 2049 is not a particularly sentimental film, but the final act is wrought with emotional moments, ending on a very powerful final scene that moved me in ways I didn't expect. Number 1, Phantom Thread. 10 years ago, Paul Thomas Anderson and Daniel Day-Lewis collaborated on There Will Be Blood, and the film went on to be considered one of the greatest films of the decade. I'm not sure if Phantom Thread will have quite the same legacy, but it is a stunning achievement worthy of comparison to Anderson's best. The film is certainly of a smaller scale than many of Anderson's recent efforts, essentially just focusing on the relationship between a fashion designer and his muse in the 1950s, but oh, what a fascinating relationship it is. Reynolds and Alma are both well-drawn and complex characters who are brought to life by a pair of brilliant performances. That Daniel Day-Lewis is excellent here is perhaps not surprising, but Vicky Krieps more than holds her own, delivering a multifaceted performance which continuously surprises. What Anderson might be saying about couples and artistry is certainly compelling and satisfying to unpack, but the relationship works more simply as narrative, one which is simple, but proves completely enthralling and builds to an unforgettable conclusion. The film also features some beautiful cinematography, while Johnny Greenwood's score perfectly captures the delicate, yet slightly unnerving quality inherent to the film. There are many films from 2017 I loved, but no film surprised me quite like Phantom Thread. And no film has lingered with me in quite the same way, hauntingly, seductively, drawing me back.
Are you sure?